Touchdown, buzzer beater, do it all now. All now, top corner talking home run. Touchdown, buzzer beater, do it all now. All now, top corner like ooh.
Alright, hello everybody and welcome to the Monday Report. I'm your host H. James K. It is Monday, March 17th, 2025. Last week I mentioned that we would be covering March Madness this week, and while we will do so, I found out that I am a total casual when it comes to college basketball, and I don't know enough about it to really have an extensive in-depth preview. So instead I'm doing what's kind of a grab bag. We're going to talk about several smaller topics, and then from there we'll pivot from one to the next until we're done. So to start us off, we're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers. So Aaron Rodgers is a prima donna. Everyone knows Aaron Rodgers is a prima donna. In 2023, he kept the football world waiting for him to make a decision on if he was going to go to the Jets or if he was going to go to the Broncos, and it kept the entire world in suspended animation where both teams made horrible decisions and bent over backwards to lure him there, only for him to be completely ineffective and get hurt and just nothing go well. So in 2023, he did this with the Jets and then proceeded to spend 2 years either getting hurt, talking bad about his teammates, or otherwise playing like hot roasted garbage. So now the Jets have told Aaron Rodgers, go away. We want to start off anew and we want to establish a new culture, and you're not going to be a part of it, so go find another team to play for. With Sam Darnold now playing for the Seahawks and Geno Smith getting traded and Kenny Pickett getting traded, the NFL free agency quarterback market has kind of settled down into a couple of teams. The Browns are looking for a quarterback. The Steelers are looking for a quarterback. The Vikings are making decisions about their quarterback. And the New York Giants are in need of a quarterback. Of those three really quarterback-needy teams, it is looking like Cleveland might sign Russell Wilson, even though Wilson has also met with the New York Giants and the Steelers. And Rodgers doesn't have any interest in going to the Browns, but he has met and had in-depth discussions with the Giants and the Steelers, and both teams are just waiting on him to make a decision. And this whole song and dance is really kind of keeping several teams in the lurch, because the Minnesota Vikings, it looks like, are going to go with J.J. McCarthy, the rookie quarterback they drafted last year who tore his meniscus after winning a national championship and all sorts of conference championships at Michigan. With the Vikings looking like they're going to roll with J.J. McCarthy, that poses a problem for Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers, by all rumors, wants to play for the Vikings, which is hilarious because that's basically completing the Brett Favre trifecta again, where he went from the Packers to the Jets to the Vikings. Aaron Rodgers apparently wants to play for the Vikings, but the Vikings have no interest. So he's still waiting around, waiting for them to either make a decision or if he's going to retire, or if he's going to choose another team to play for. And this whole thing is leaving several apples up in the air. Like, Russell Wilson is deciding where he wants to play, and depending on which team Rodgers chooses will greatly influence where Russell Wilson signs. So everyone is kind of in this stupid, frustrating holding pattern that just goes on and on and on. And everyone who's been paying attention to this whole situation knows that no matter where he goes, he's going to bring the same media song and dance where he tries to take over team building and skips practices and talks bad about his teammates in front of the press and undermines the coach and is a general disruptor and prima donna. So, ultimately, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to retire instead of playing for the inept Giants and the offensively illiterate Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, that has far-reaching consequences of its own, because then, what does Russell Wilson do? Because if Aaron Rodgers is gone, then Russell Wilson becomes the top free agent, and does he sign with Cleveland after all? Does he try to re-sign with the Steelers? Does he go knock on the Giants' door. So it's all very complicated, and we were hoping to get answers to all of this on Friday, but, well, it's Monday, and we haven't gotten any answers so far. Next, we're going to talk about Demarcus Lawrence. So, for those who don't know, Demarcus Lawrence is a defensive end in the NFL who has played for the Dallas Cowboys for the last 11 seasons. He has 60-something sacks. He's been there, done that. He's been a locker room guy, a real presence, and this year, the Cowboys didn't re-sign him. They let him walk, and he has since signed a contract with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, what's interesting about that is that even though the Seattle Seahawks are in a full-on rebuild, having signed Sam Darnold and everything, when asked about why he left for Seattle and everything, Demarcus Lawrence basically said, well, I'm not going to win a Super Bowl in Dallas, so I might as well go somewhere else. Now, on the face of it, that doesn't seem super inflammatory. I mean, a former culture guy who played for the Dallas Cowboys saying basically that nobody has any chance of winning a Super Bowl at the Dallas Cowboys, and they all kind of know it. While that's notable, that isn't what made this whole situation newsworthy. What made the situation newsworthy is Dallas Cowboys' other star defensive end, Micah Parsons, the former Penn State defensive lineman and linebacker. He clapped back at Demarcus Lawrence on Twitter, basically saying that this is what jealousy and anger feel like, and he called it some stupid shit or something like that. And that is what has really caught some people off guard, because by all accounts, a position group like the defensive line will have a group chat among all the players on a specific team. And this kind of thing would be dealt with like over a text or a phone call, instead of airing the dirty laundry on Twitter and clapping back at your former teammates about what they're saying now that they're outside of the organization. This all leads to questions about culture, because we've seen this several times with like Dalton Schultz and several other players where they leave the Dallas Cowboys and immediately start talking crap about the Cowboys operation. By all accounts, the Dallas Cowboys is kind of a circus at Jerry World, where they're doing fan tours all the time, and Jerry Jones has a radio show every week, and Micah Parsons has a podcast every week. And all of these distractions take away from the fact that the team doesn't really feel that interested in winning championships and focusing on winning. So what we see now is the players in the building know they're not going to win a championship. The players on the outside know the Cowboys are not going to win a championship, but no one's willing to say this until they actually leave Dallas, and then once they get out, they start admitting, oh yeah, there's no way the Cowboys are going to win. There's just, even when they're really good, they're not going to win a championship because the team's culture is just not conducive to that. What's interesting about this for me is, once is interesting, two is a coincidence. 5 players doing this, including like stud players who had been around forever, that's a trend. That's a worrying trend that should be taken notice of. And it's one of these things where all of this boils down to Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones is the owner and the GM of the team. He makes all the financial decisions, all of the salary cap decisions and roster decisions and all this other stuff. And he kind of coaches the team too, because as we see, the press goes to Jerry Jones after a game before they go talk to the head coach, and he constantly undermines his head coach's power, and he never hires head coaches who have a real independent streak. He always gets kind of a yes man who will do what he says, as evidenced by Mike McCarthy and now Brian Schottenheimer, who's the new head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So all of this boils down to him, and until he dies and his son sells the team, I don't think this is going to change. It's been 29 years since the Cowboys even contended for a Super Bowl. And considering how the Jones family runs the team, I don't think that's going to change at all. All right, moving on from the NFL, we got to talk about Formula 1. So on Sunday at midnight, we had the Australian Grand Prix, the first round of the Formula 1 season. And it quickly became apparent that the McLaren cars are very fast. So the two McLaren cars driven by Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri qualified 1-2, with Lando Norris getting the pole in a front row lockout. And what was interesting is Sunday's race was a wet to dry race where there was a lot of rain early and then it kind of tapered off, and it was questions about if it was going to be dry by the end of the race or not. And what we had is a lot of teams setting up their cars for the wet, even though qualifying was dry. Because after qualifying, the cars go to parc ferme, and you can't touch them at all until the race starts. So it was interesting watching the cars not really set up for a dry, hot track on Saturday, then racing in a wet, cold, windy track on Sunday. And the McLaren cars displayed incredible pace during qualifying. And then again, once the race started. The rain ended up being a huge factor in the race, which wasn't surprising to anybody considering the forecast had shown that it was going to be a wet race. And when the race started, the rain was kind of petering out, and it was a game of how long do you wait and drive around on your intermediate compound of tire, hoping for the track to dry out before you go to slick tires. And when the race started, the McLarens drove away. By mid-race, Oscar Piastri was 15.6 seconds ahead of third place Max Verstappen, with Lando Norris another 2.5 seconds ahead of Piastri. The McLarens were gone. They were gone. And if the race had continued clean-ish, it was looking like the McLarens were going to win an easy one. I say clean-ish because on the pace lap to begin the race, Isaac Hadjar spun and crashed and totaled his car. And then on the ensuing pace laps, both Jack Doohan, driving for Alpine, and Carlos Sainz, driving for Williams, spun and crashed into the wall in two separate locations because of the wet conditions. Now, this led to 15 laps of pacing under caution, while the Australian track officials got the cars off the track and collected all the bits and pieces that came off the cars, and it was just a harbinger of things to come. This race was absolutely bonkers. And for the first half of it, it looked like Lando Norris and Piastri were just going to drive away, and that was going to be that. And then Fernando Alonso crashed. And his crash changed everything because a safety car came out while they picked up all the pieces of Alonso's car, bunching up the field, eliminating the McLaren's very, very, very big lead, and it brought on several more laps of pacing. And as they're getting ready to go green again, there's talk of, hey, there might be more rain coming. Well, is it Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3? Class 1 is a light drizzle. Class 2 is persistent, but no big deal. You put on a coat. 3 is, it's raining. Then there's classes 4 and 5. Now 4 is like, it's raining. And then 5 is like full-on bucketing monsoon, notable weather, flash flood advisory kind of stuff. So there became all this talk of, hey, by lap 45, we're going to get some Class 2 or Class 3 rain, and it might last 1 lap, it might last 2, it might last 3. We don't really know. So now everyone who's on these ancient intermediate tires is having to play the game of, do we go to slicks because the track is drying right now and it's very dry and it's almost too dry for intermediate tires, or do we just kind of wait and drive in the parts of the track that are still damp and just hope that the rain comes and then just change into new intermediate tires? Do we just say screw the rain and go into slicks? And this entire process played out over a couple laps, where eventually, before they decided to go green again, everybody went into the pits and went on either medium tires or hard tires, with the McLarens going on the hards and Max Verstappen going on the medium. And then, of course, the race restarted, and they're driving around for 4 or so laps when the rain arrives. And at first, they're like, yeah, I think we can just kind of outlive this rain and just drive around slowly and just kind of adapt. And then Oscar Piastri spun out on a turn and spun into the grass and got beached and lost 13 positions. Then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, we just cannot drive around on slick tires in this rain anymore. So everyone starts madly diving into the pits, and the McLarens go and the Mercedes go. And what's interesting is Red Bull tells Max Verstappen, stay out for one more lap. And the Ferrari stayed out for 2 more laps. It looked crazy because it was like all of a sudden Max is in the lead and the Ferraris are way up there and the Haas cars are way up there. And then the McLarens came back out on intermediate tires with the rest of the field, and Max pits a lap later, and it's just the Ferraris out on the track, and then they're waiting, and they're losing positions until eventually they lose like 4 positions apiece, going down to like 9th and 10th at the time, while the McLarens retook the lead. And well, I shouldn't say the McLarens, I should say Lando Norris retook the lead because Piastri was marooned in the back of the top 10. So the decision to wait really, really cost Max Verstappen. It cost him something like 23 seconds. And ultimately, that's what decided the race because Lando Norris was able to drive around under green with intermediate tires and hold off Max Verstappen for the win in what was ultimately a crazy chaotic race. Only 14 of the 20 cars actually finished the race, which is a lot of attrition that we really don't see in Formula One these days. And coming away from the race, my ultimate thoughts were just, 1, it was good to have Formula One back. 2, that was one of the best Formula One races I've ever watched. And 3, the McLarens are going to be a serious problem this year because they were fast. When they were just allowed to get going into a groove, they drove away from the field, especially when it was drier. So it's one of those where looking at this year, man, Max Verstappen better hope he can win a couple races because if the McLarens are able to just kind of 1-3, 2-5, 1-4, 1-2 their way through the entire season, they'll win the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship going away with very little trouble. Now, going forward, obviously Max Verstappen is a driver to watch out for. He's the only driver at Red Bull who's worth paying attention to. And there's the Mercedes team who finished in who finished in 3rd and 4th, which is George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. And they finished in 3rd and 4th. And those 2 drivers are now 2nd in the Constructors behind the McLaren team, which is 1st in the Constructors' Championship. So it'll be interesting to watch how all this plays out because Liam Lawson, Max Verstappen's teammate, by all accounts, isn't up to it. He just can't drive the car because I guess the Red Bull is a very pointy car. It's very on the nose. It snaps a lot. It gets a lot of oversteer, which is how Max Verstappen likes to drive. But that's very hard for a lot of other drivers to manage. So it looks like it's going to be Max Verstappen going it alone this year versus the 2 McLarens and the 2 Mercedes and maybe the 2 Ferraris. Who knows? We don't know everything yet, but we know enough to go, this is going to be really interesting going forward. All right, last but not least, let's get on to March Madness. March Madness is coming this week or next week, or it's coming soon. And we're seeing some interesting things. So for the longest time, there were some basketball conferences that really dominated college basketball. But we're seeing an interesting change in the last couple of years. So this year, the Southeastern Conference, which is known as the football conference, is projected to get the most teams in the tournament, with 13. They're the only conference to get double-digit teams. The Big Ten, another predominantly football conference, is expected to get 9 teams in, while the Big East, which used to be a football conference and is now the quintessential basketball conference, is projected to get only 5 teams into the tournament. What's interesting about this is it kind of points to the large NIL budgets and increased facilities of these football schools is starting to really pay dividends in basketball as well, where the teams can afford to spend more money on NIL, they can afford to have more recruiting budgets, and the status of them as these predominantly, preeminent, big, powerful football schools is now we're seeing very popular with basketball recruits as well. So it begs the question, are we seeing this thing where the New England basketball schools that we've all known, like UConn and Xavier and Creighton and all of these teams, are they going the way of the dodo as Southern and Midwestern power conference teams start to take over? Beyond all the hypotheticals, the bracket itself is now out, but I'm recording this on Sunday, so I haven't seen the bracket yet, and I can only go off of predictions. So right now, the 4 1 seeds in the tournament are projected to be Auburn, Florida, both of which are in the SEC, Duke, and Houston, with Auburn apparently the clear favorite to be the top overall seed. Now, what's very interesting about this is Duke is a traditional basketball power, but Auburn, Florida, and Houston are not really known for being one of these teams that wins year in and year out. Now, on the other end of the bracket, the last 4 teams, who are the last 4 teams who will have to play games against each other to win their way into the tournament, are Indiana, Xavier, Vanderbilt, and San Diego State. Now, Indiana is not the basketball school it used to be under Bobby Knight, and they have fallen a long way. I think they have fired their coach, but I can't remember, to be honest with you. And what will happen is each of these 4 teams will play a game against one of the others, and whoever wins that game gets that spot in the bracket. So hopefully the Hoosiers do it, because I like Big Ten teams. But, never know if Vanderbilt, another SEC team, could do something crazy and make another run. Who knows? The first 4 teams out, which are the 4 teams at the top of the talent level who didn't make the tournament. This would be like, in college football, this would be like teams ranked 13, 14, 15, 16, or whatever. Those 4 teams are Texas, Boise State, North Carolina, and best of all, the Ohio State Buckeyes. So North Carolina apparently just hasn't had enough good wins, and Texas and Boise have too many losses to really get in, and, well, Ohio State sucks and they're inferior, and it gives me great joy to see them lose. Meanwhile, Ohio State's biggest rival, the Michigan Wolverines, are expected to be either a 4th seed or a 5th seed in the tournament, but they're more than likely going to be a 5th seed. Here's hoping they're a 4th seed. I don't know. Sadly, my alma mater, Oakland University, lost in the Horizon League Conference Tournament to eventual conference champion and projected 15 seed Robert Morris. So my alma mater will not be able to replicate their magical run from last year, which is very disappointing. And here I was hoping that the Golden Grizzlies would be able to make another crazy run, but there's always next year. All right, so that will do us for this episode of the Monday Report. Next week, I'm probably going to do a podcast episode about baseball's role in modern popular culture and everything. I don't really know how that's going to go, but that's the plan for right now. And that's, of course, because opening day is coming up quick, and I figured it was time to talk about baseball. And I'm even more of a casual with baseball than I am with college basketball, but we'll see how it goes. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all on YouTube for searching this thing out. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, do all the things to help grow this podcast into something that is actually worth listening to. Thank you all for listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else that podcasts are available. I thank you all because it is hard to find my podcast, and if you're listening, then I appreciate that tremendously. My name is H. James K. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.